this for a Bears win. Snap, placement down by O'Donnell. Kick by Eddy Pineiro. Kick, he's up. No! It is no good. He missed it as time expires. 17-16, Chargers the win. I thought it was good.
That was a moment on Sunday that defeat was snatched from the jaws of victory at Soldier Field. It looked like the Bears were going to win the game, and Eddy Pineiro goes just wide left. Big Cat, is it better or worse that it wasn't a doink?
Well, we already had a doink earlier in the game. So Eddy Pineiro already doinked one earlier in the game, one that was closer. It's better that it was not a doink. Yes, it's better, okay? So people like you, the simple minds in the world, can't keep making the same joke over and over thinking it's funny.
Okay, so here's what's not funny. The strategy that preceded the kick, because Matt Nagy chose not to try to get more yardage, to move the kick closer. Newsflash, the closer the kick is, the easier it is to make. Nagy refused to do that, taking a knee instead and actually moving the kick back a little bit, making it that 41-yard try that ultimately had the game riding on it. Make it and you win, miss it and you lose. And Nagy said he gave zero thought to doing anything other than take a knee. That was on Sunday. On Monday, after he had a chance to sleep on it, Nagy addressed it again. Here he is, doubling down on the decision to do things exactly the way he did them, and he would never do it any differently. Here's Matt Nagy.
It's not about trust. It's about playing smart. It's a 40-yard field goal. Think about that, okay? That takes nothing away from Pineiro. We love Eddy. We got all the faith in the world in him. We know he's going to bounce back. Ask anybody on the team. It's the NFL. It happens. How do you respond to it, right? How do you respond to it? So I really, it's to me, I'm very, very comfortable knowing what I did. I'm very, very comfortable knowing if I'm in that exact situation again, okay, at that same yard line, I'm going to do the same thing.
See, that's the thing that concerns me about coaching. I think for any aspect of the game, if you have an inflexibility, if you have no consideration for variables that may cause you to look at different situations differently, if you say this is the way I'm always going to do something, just because I don't want to revisit it, I don't want to clutter my mind with, these aren't that difficult of decisions. You have to be willing to factor in everything. And maybe sometimes it is the smart thing to take a knee. Sometimes it's the smart thing to try to get it closer. But I think when it comes to a field goal, it's always smart to try to get it closer. I know, hey, you run that ball, you're taking the chance there's going to be a fumble or there's going to be some other screwy thing that happens that knocks you back even farther. I get that. But when I don't like the inflexibility, Big Cat. I did it and I will always do it and I'll never change no matter what. I just don't like that. That's not an acceptable explanation, especially when something went poorly.
It's the inflexibility, and Mike, that soundbite you just played, it's so clear that Matt Nagy is kind of cracking here because he's trying to basically push the blame to Eddy Pineiro, repeating the fact, hey, it's a 40-yard field goal. This is the NFL. You should make a 40-yard field goal. Yeah, you should, but you know what's better than a 40-yard field goal? A 35-yard field goal. When you have a timeout and so here's my biggest problem with what Matt Nagy said after the game, with what he's doubling down with. He, does not trust his offense. It's so clear. The fact that he cannot say, when he says, well, they know you're going to run, so you can't get 3 or 4 yards. Says who? Put your best goal line put your best goal line offense in there. Run the ball. Hat on hat. You've run the ball for 135 yards. David Montgomery had on Sunday. They were able to push them around. They had time of possession by about 10 minutes. They had the Chargers defense gassed. They could have gotten 3 or 4 yards running. Okay, so don't run the ball. That's fine if you want to go with that. If they know you're running, then pass the ball. If they know you're running, you can throw the ball. You have a timeout in your pocket. You do not trust Mitch Trubisky, and that is very clear. And then finally, Mike, the last point here, he completely contradicted himself in his own statements, and the fact that he's doubling down on his contradiction is absolutely insane. Mike, I'm reading the exact words that Matt Nagy said after the game. He said, we were in field goal range before the scramble, and then we got the scramble, so that didn't even cross my mind talking about running the football. So if you remember the sequence, Mitch Trubisky runs for, I think it was an 11-yard scramble, gets closer, then they kneel the ball and call a timeout. So when a reporter asked, why wouldn't you throw the ball or run the ball? He says, what happens if you take a sack or there's a fumble? You lose the game. But if you're already in field goal range, how do you lose the game with a sack, Mike? You have a timeout. So he contradicted himself. If you're already in field goal range before the scramble, then you get the scramble, and you now are not going to run a pass play because you might take a sack and get out of field goal range, you've contradicted yourself. You're doing doublespeak here. And so Matt Nagy, I think, to me, he's a good coach, but he's kind of cracking here. And things have gone sideways for him, and Mitch Trubisky's not the guy, and we know Mitch Trubisky's not the guy, which, by the way, that's partially Matt Nagy's fault because he was brought in to make Mitch Trubisky the guy. So when we all bash Mitch Trubisky, and he deserves a lot of, people saying he's not the guy and he's not going to ever be him, because I think we've seen enough that we know that, Matt Nagy should be in that pile too, because he was the guy who was brought in to make Mitch Trubisky a competent, above-average quarterback, and it hasn't happened. I just think that Matt Nagy is cracking. He is panicking. You saw in the first half when the team is down at the goal line and they completely botched the goal line first half offense. I've never seen anything like that. It's just little things too, Mike. The offensive lineman not being able to get up off the field and getting back to the ball fast enough to call a couple plays there, not getting spikes off, not running the ball on 3rd and 9 from 3rd and goal from the 9-yard line. It all just feels like panicky moves, and they have to figure out a way to get this back on track because it's teetering right now, Mike. It's teetering, and it feels like it could all go really bad.
This reminds me of the scene from Hard Knocks last year, the Hugh Jackson-Todd Haley conversation about when and how you use players in training camp. And the line from Todd Haley was, we can't reside in our fears. And I feel like Matt Nagy has taken full and complete residence in his fear, and he's afraid of everything. And every decision he makes is calculated to avoid a mistake, to avoid a turnover, to avoid a sack, to avoid something he can be criticized for later. How else do you justify when you snap the ball 2nd and goal from the 1 at the end of the second quarter with 25 seconds on the clock, and the play goes 1 yard, and you don't try to call another play, and you let it bleed all the way down to 1 second before you spike it to kick a field goal? Who does that? I'll tell you who does that. Somebody who has bought real estate in his fears. And that's where he is. And everything now is motivated by avoiding that thing that is going to come back to haunt him. And as a result, everything is coming back to haunt him.
And the Cody Parkey thing last year, I think, really did have an effect on him because you saw it when he did the kicking competitions every single day in the spring, and everyone had to line up and kick a 43-yard field goal, and everyone had to watch. And it's the inability to move on, and you're right. Playing in your fears here feels like it's kind of taking a toll on Matt Nagy's decision-making. And look, if you don't trust Mitch Trubisky, you need to then put in Chase Daniel because you can't win not trusting the quarterback. And it's pretty clear you don't trust him when you make decisions like this. Mike, the last thing I'll say, and I'm obviously very fired up because I want them to succeed, and I want Matt Nagy to be the guy because here's really what it comes down to. Mitch Trubisky, I think everyone knows the Bears are probably going to at least bring in competition next year for Mitch Trubisky, if not, move on fully from him. If Matt Nagy's also a mistake, the Bears are in big trouble because then that means that Ryan Pace has kind of screwed up his two biggest decisions in the quarterback and the coach. And yeah, he deserves a lot of credit for what he's done with his defense, but if you don't have a quarterback and a coach, you don't have anything. So this is why I say it's teetering, and it reminds me of Mark Trestman in 2013. You will remember this, Mike, because it came against your Vikings. Remember when he kicked on 2nd down with Robbie Gould, and everyone second-guessed that, and it felt like everything kind of shifted from there, and all the bad vibes came in, and the second-guessing. That's where you feel right now with the teetering, and it doesn't feel like Matt Nagy's really up for the job, especially handling the media. I think he's just being so defiant that at some point you have to say, just admit you made a mistake. Just, don't be so adversarial with the media. Always just answer the question, and don't say you're not going to get into it and you would never make a different decision. Be honest. It's okay. It's okay. We talked about this with Brian Flores. Be honest sometimes with the media. It goes a long way.
Let me ask you this question before we take our break. If Mitch Trubisky were to be benched, right, is that something Matt Nagy can do without Ryan Pace's blessing? Because at some point, Pace is invested in this because he's the guy who traded up a spot with Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson on the board. Sorry to mention that, but I had to. He's the guy that made the Trubisky decision before Matt Nagy was even employed by the Bears. Could Nagy have that power to bench Trubisky without Pace signing off on it?
That's a good question. When it comes to these decisions, I just assume everyone is just trying to keep their job. So Matt Nagy right now is probably saying, look, it's Ryan Pace's guy. I can push him off. I can say that's Ryan Pace's guy. I'm dealing with what I've been dealt here. Like, Mitch Trubisky was put on me, even though that's not really how it worked, because Matt Nagy came to Chicago after Mitch Trubisky was drafted, so he clearly in the meeting sold them that he could be the guy to make Mitch Trubisky great, which is something we've kind of, and oh yeah, by the way, Mike, he was also on the coaching staff when that draft went down with the Kansas City Chiefs, and the Chiefs traded up for Patrick Mahomes. So I would guess that Matt Nagy liked Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson a lot more than Mitch Trubisky in that draft. So then him doing an interview and saying, oh yeah, I love Mitch Trubisky. I think I can be the guy to change him. He deserves blame for that. But to answer your question, I honestly don't know. And it's a situation that I'm worried about because the whole thing doesn't it feel like we're teetering on a little bit of everything falling apart?
Yeah, we are. And 1 year after an NFC North championship, but you know what? That didn't save Ben McAdoo. He was in the playoffs 1 year and he was gone in the middle of the next season. Here's another dynamic to consider, Big Cat, with this Matt Nagy, Chicago Bears, Ryan Pace situation. As this thing begins to fall apart, and I think your instincts are accurate, it feels like it's falling apart just a year after the Bears won the NFC North Championship. This is when we get into the stuff that may be going on behind the scenes between Pace and Nagy, because they're going to start blaming each other. Even though Nagy is a Pace hire and it's Pace's second hire, and chances are if Nagy goes, Pace goes too, Nagy could be making the power play behind the scenes. Nagy could be the one saying, I took the team to the NFC North Championship last year without guys that I picked. If I just had a little more say in the quarterback, let me pick a quarterback. Let me have a quarterback. Maybe we need a different GM. Maybe we need, there's different subtle ways that this stuff plays out. And it's part of the dysfunction that can descend on a football team when the GM and the coach aren't tied at the hip like they should be. And that's the next phase to watch of this, because if Nagy's cracking up externally, he's cracking up internally, and he may be thinking about doing anything he can to protect himself, and that would include trying to undermine the guy who gave him Mitchell Trubisky.
And to add on all that, Mike, the Bears don't have a lot of draft picks. If you look at it, they have two second rounders this year. They have no first rounder. I think they have no third or fourth rounder. So when you talk about turning pages and adding talent and having everyone feel like there's a fresh start, it's going to be hard to do that when you don't have the draft capital and there's not compensatory picks coming. So I'm just nervous about the whole thing. It feels like everything that was good last year has completely turned. And from the double doink, I know we joke about it, and I'm so sick of hearing about the double doink, but the double doink was, the nail in the coffin, as it is right now, of this regime, because they have to figure it out, and they have to figure it out fast.
And that makes what the Saints have done the past couple of years even more impressive. They shrugged off the Minneapolis Miracle. They shrugged off that horrible call in the NFC Championship game, and here they are, 7-1, and by all indications, ready to have their hearts broken in the playoffs again. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.